Welcome to Brooklyn Savvy, where we have vital conversations that lead to understanding and deeper connections. I'm Toni Williams, your host. We're in the midst of some troubling times as this country has moved forward, but not everyone is aligned. Today, we're diving into what it means to be an ally and the complexities that exist within this relationship. As systemic inequities persist, it's more important than ever to explore meaningful strategies for allies who are truly committed to supporting marginalized communities. Joining us for this important conversation is Dr. Jonathan Metzl, Director of the Center for Medicine, Health, and Society at Vanderbilt University, whose work examines the intersection of politics, health, and social justice. Together, we'll unpack the challenges, responsibilities, and opportunities that come with being an effective ally in today's world. Let's get started. I wanted to create a safe space to have uncomfortable yet transformative conversations that move people, amplifying the voices of those who are underrepresented and who inspire positive change. I'm Toni Williams, and this is Brooklyn Savvy. It's such a pleasure to have you on the show, Dr. Metzl. It's been looking forward to this because I am very familiar with a lot of your work when it comes to allyship and white privilege and all of those kinds of issues. So I'm looking forward to diving into this discussion on allyship, and I'm going to start first with Dr. De Longoria. What is an ally, and why do you think allies are important? You're looking at me as if you have an answer.
For me, an ally is somebody who sits comfortably and gets to say, I support you, yay, go team, go, versus an accomplice who is in there doing the work with you, that is getting dirty, that is burning down the structures with you, that is dismantling the racism that's there, not just saying, yes, go team.
So you think that that's what allyship means then? Just somebody that's sitting...
I think that's what it's become, yeah.
Oh, that's what it's become.
I think it's a really comfortable space for people who don't really want to get their hands dirty, but believe in the cause, right? They're not willing to get uncomfortable with it. I think accomplice gets uncomfortable with it.
Okay, Phyllis, what do you think?
So I believe that an ally is somebody that is going to open doors that might not otherwise be open to certain people. It may have come to this point where it is somebody just sitting there, but actually that important role, being in a position where you can open doors for others, very, very important. And I'd hope to think that people are continuing to take that role very seriously.
Christine.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I think I can agree with all the points that were shared by the panelistas. I do think that there is a value in having an ally. I do think that some people have hid behind it, but I think in this time when there's so much polarization, in fact, that was the 2024 word from Merriam-Webster. Right. There is so much polarization. I think we're asking our allies to be much more visible and active.
To become accomplices.
Correct.
Exactly. So, now, what do you say in terms of, because I'm wondering, is this just semantics, you know? I mean, is an ally basically, you know, morphing into accomplices? But yeah, I'd like to hear what you think.
Well, thank you. I'm so honored to be part of this conversation. I actually don't use the word allyship in my scholarship. I talk about alliance, and I think right now's a time where so many people, and part of it is that I just think that there's something potentially, not always, many well-intentioned people, but there's something potentially performative about allyship, and we've seen it. You know, people, politicians who never thought about it, and then they're kneeling down with a kente cloth, and all these other things, and even DEI, which we're not supposed to say anymore. It let people kind of check the box, right, in a certain kind of way, and so I think part of the issue is, did we really build real alliances that were? I mean, it's easy when you're on top of the world,
right?
But right now, many people are struggling, many people are suffering, many people feel like they're in a particular relationship to something else that's happening out there. And if allyship is the word people use, how can we build our alliances right now? Allyship implies like there's something very triggering, like, oh, you didn't do this, therefore you're not inside or something like that. And right now, I just feel like we all have to feel like we're all on the same side. Like
Absolutely.
Right now's a
Right.
moment. And so in a way, a lot of the old codes, a lot of the things are changing. And so I just think, how can we build our alliances in ways that I could not agree more, have real power, right? We actually can't be doing things that are performative right now because it's not going to work. And so the question is, how can we join together across all these kind of divides to think about ways that we can push back on some really horrible things that are happening now, but also imagine the world we want on the other side of, how do we get here and where are we going?
And that is the fundamental question, the how did we get here? Historically, we know how we've gotten here. Speak to that, Maria, how we have actually gotten here.
Let's start with Racism 101. We can start with U.S. History 101. We can start with Marginalizing People 101. We can start with Enslavement 101. I mean, that's how we got here, right? And because people in power have not wanted to relinquish any of that power, right? Nobody ever does who's in power, because what does that mean to them personally, right? But also when people who have been colonized or who have been enslaved or who have been marginalized to whatever extent they've been marginalized, when that dynamic changes and they become a part of the structure, they just assimilate into the same structures that marginalized or enslaved them from the start. And so unless there's some kind of change, some kind of progressiveness, or some kind of sometimes maybe going back to the root, because there are structures in history that have been successful before, we're going to end up in the same cycle.
All right. I think a lot about rural America, right? And I would like to know your thoughts around why is it that it seems white people who don't know black people, because you've done a lot of work in this area, that have never even seen a black person, have attitudes that are so negative?
I wrote a book called Dying of Whiteness, and I spent 5 years doing research across conservative parts of Tennessee, Kentucky, Kansas, Missouri. That's where I'm from. And I interviewed a lot of people, and the project started when I was interviewing people who were rejecting their own health care.
Right.
And so the kind of story of that book was the Affordable Care Act was coming down the pike. I was interviewing quite medically ill people. Why were they rejecting their own health care? Why were they saying, we don't want the Affordable Care Act here, even though it was shortening their lifespans? And I heard a lot of different answers when I interviewed. We interviewed tons of focus groups across white and black and Latino groups across rural areas. And part of the story was about an anxiety that a lot of the white participants that we interviewed felt, that there were resources that should have been going to them that were going to somebody else, or that they weren't getting the resources they need because somebody else was cutting in front of them in line. And so for people who've read that book, there are a lot of crazy quotes, like people who were dying of liver failure who said, I know I would survive, I would live if I got the Affordable Care Act, but as one man told me, I don't want, as he said, quote, I don't want my tax dollars going to Mexicans or welfare queens, as he put it. And so part of the story was about this feeling like people who were in rural America were in competition with other racial groups for resources. And that part of the story is important because they actually were, right? All the resources were going to tax cuts for wealthy people and corporations. And so that's part of the story. And then the other part of the story is what led people to the kind of desperation that they would be willing, like, if you're dying, you want health care. If you're going medically bankrupt, somebody throws you a lifeline. So what led people to feel so distrustful of the government that no matter what it was, they were going to reject it? And it's a complicated story, but it has to do with history, the politics of race in America. And I think it's important to understand that so that we don't oversimplify how we got here, and that we can actually figure out the kind of alliances we need to move forward.
Can I add
Okay,
something?
please.
So if you go back through history, that was deliberate, right? It started with creating this rift between Native Americans, free black people, and enslaved black people. And then it continues with poor white, the former indentured servants. There always had to be a lower class and an upper class, but they did not want that lower class to align themselves, that lower white class to align themselves with free black, with enslaved black, and with Native Americans. So things were done deliberately to create and to foster that kind of hate and animosity between each other so that they didn't recognize themselves. You see it on, if you look at plantation life, you had poor white working on plantations with enslaved people, but they thought themselves better. They didn't see themselves or their conditions as being similar to. They didn't join in any fight to change things. And even after enslavement, you saw some of the same stuff where there is this ideology that if you keep this class of people, thinking they're one step ahead of this class of people, then you'll never see that unity, that class unity, right? Because they did not want class warfare. And if you look at it, when Martin Luther King was killed, he was adding to his fight the struggles of working class people.
I trained in psychiatry and I trained in medicine, right? And so on one hand, part of what I learned in my training is that the drive toward well-being or longevity is a core human drive. And so on one hand, when you see people who are rejecting healthcare, you think they are acting against their own interests. So that was how I started the project. I would never call it a mental illness because I just don't think we get very far by.
Right. No,
this was like 2016, 2017, and people would be rejecting their own healthcare, and they'd be like, "Oh, we don't want our money going to all the Mexicans who are coming and the immigrants and stuff like that." It was so powerful. And even though you're supposed to be like neutral doing the focus group, there's plenty of resource to go around. If you create conditions of scarcity, then people
intentionally, to your point.
Intentionally. And so the point was, I wanted to say there's enough money for everybody to get health care right now, but all the money is being taken to go toward what we're seeing now with all these cuts. I do agree with you that people were pitted against each other. And I mean intentionally, and Du Bois wrote about this with the wage of whiteness, which I think you were referencing. But the idea that basically people who could form alliance, people who could form allyship, if they would work toward common socioeconomic goals, but tribalization works against that alliance and for other greater things. So we're in that moment now.
Capitalism doesn't support it either.
How do we somehow get in between so that people can begin to see what's going on with themselves? What do we do? How do we deal with that? How do we change that?
I'm going to give you a totally not psychiatrist answer.
Which is good.
Because I think right now, just to be honest, I think we're beyond psychology right now. Like we're in a real crisis right now. And so we're not in a kumbaya moment. The question is, how can we build structures that reward cooperation and disincentivize competition? That's kind of how I think about things these days. And
You said disincentivize competition.
Right.
Interesting.
And where are you seeing that?
Okay, so I'll give you an example. When the Affordable Care Act was coming down the pike, the Democrats, God love them, I mean, I'm a Democrat, but it was like, oh, we give people health care, they're just going to accept it like manna from heaven. If you tell people it's government-related health care in the South, it's complicated. Not everybody loves the government. Some people really distrust the government for different reasons. So the first framers of the ACA said, how are we going to get people to do this? We're not going to go around and try to talk to people about their deep thoughts about government or community or ethnicity. So they had this idea that they would create an incentive structure around entire communities. If your whole community worked together to lower your ER visits, lower your systolic blood pressure, create more parks, more bike lanes, all these cost-effective public health infrastructure things, and not just for your own block, but you worked with somebody 2 blocks down and another neighborhood and somebody you never spoke with before. The idea was we'll get people to feel what's called social cohesion. That's what health insurance does. It makes people feel like they're in the same social network. And then we all want to be healthy because like if that guy is healthy, then it lowers my premium. And the idea was if we all did this, they would give tax breaks to the entire town, not just to one community. And the idea was we're going to get people to get together. And there's a lot of research that shows that health insurance networks do this. This was one of the first things that was cut out of the negotiation by the GOP when they were arguing, because they realized if they
don't want us coming together.
Yeah, if people could come together in just this really basic everyday way. And so for me, I keep thinking like, what are ways that we can rebuild those networks where people feel like how somebody else acts is important to me in my interest or
right. My choice impacts you. My choices impact you.
That idea of health insurance to me is such a good model for other things. How can we get people to feel like we're on the same side? As we know from history, that kind of collaboration is incredibly threatening, because then people feel it's not just about something, they feel like they have common interests, and that's how unions work and other things work as well.
It seems like folks just really like feeling better than each other, huh? I mean, what is that? That's kind of interesting too. The idea that everything else, I don't care about anything else that's going on in my life as long as I feel better than you. You want to respond to that, Phyllis? I mean, I don't understand that.
It comes with the way that we've been socialized. Our system is that there are those that have, those that don't have. There is the scarcity that we talked about a little bit before, the fact that there's not enough for everybody. So in order for me to keep what's mine, there's got to be somebody that doesn't have. There's a system built on it, and that it's built into our psyches. Truly, that's the way we behave.
I've got a, go ahead, you want to respond, please?
I think it's right. I mean, I love Heather McGhee's book, The Sum of Us, and the idea that basically our entire political system is winners and losers, which is based on race and class and history. First of all, we're operating in a system where if I win, the other person loses. And even though it's scary right now what's happening, it's a incredibly amplified version of something we see every time, which is if I win, I get to seat all the judges and I get to make all the decisions and the other side doesn't. So our system, it's a two-party, zero-sum political system, and then our system of race and class are also zero-sum systems, as we've known from history. And so this kind of idea of winners and losers, it's just, it brings out the worst in people, I think.
There was something else in your book, Dying of Whiteness, though, and it had to do around suicide rates of white men and firearms. Again, suicide. Can you talk to us about what you discovered in that?
So I stayed in with the southern part of Missouri, a place called Cape Girardeau, Missouri. They called it the most pro-gun part of the country at the time. Everybody had weapons, and it's incredibly conservative white area, like many of the places I was studying. Let me say first, Tennessee, where I studied healthcare, it didn't used to be like that, right? Tennessee was the national model of healthcare, and then this tribal politics took over, and it kind of ruined the infrastructure of the state. And so I just want to make clear, it's not like I think there's something wrong with people's minds. I think that this tribal politics upends. And so I went to southern Missouri, and I started interviewing people, and so I started saying, like, why do you got so many guns? Part of the story was people were arming themselves against these threats. If you look at gun research, the biggest threat of having a gun is having a gun in your house.
Right.
Suicide rates of white men started to skyrocket. Missouri became the #1 state for gun suicide. So this whole idea was we're buying guns against this racial threat, but it turned out they were bringing the threat into their house.
You talk about psychology, but what I'm listening to and hearing is the psychology of making people fearful. When people don't feel safe, it brings on all of these other things that we're talking about. Fear is the great motivator.
And tribalism.
Safety is what human beings need. That's what we thrive on to survive.
And isn't tribalism basically groupthink? Meaning we're all thinking the same or similarly. You know, we're all so it's a groupthink kind. That's not healthy, really.
I mean, again, my new book is called What We've Become, and I actually argue exactly your point, which is trying to study now what makes people feel safe, because I also think there's something structural. Like, turns out there's a great literature about that. If you fix the streetlights in a neighborhood, if you build green space, if you have jobs programs, if you have well-lit public transit, that reduces gun crime more than any gun law that we've ever invented.
How do we really fix any of this with all of this structure and entrenchment? How do we fix this? When it comes to who has the power and the privilege, it wouldn't be us necessarily, but it would be you, so to speak. Yeah.
I think, first of all, I think that the point, I mean, I saw this in my writing a new book. My new book is about guns in America, basically. And I saw just how effective this division technology is. It was actually really scary that, you know, after George Floyd was murdered, Black Americans had traditionally had exactly your attitude, which is for 30, 40 years had said, we want there to be regulation on guns because we don't like them in our homes or we've seen them in our neighborhoods. And after George Floyd, Black Americans were targeted relentlessly by social media advertising, other kinds of messaging saying, this could be you could be the next George Floyd, or the police aren't going to save you. And all of a sudden, gun ownership in Black America went up. I'm Jewish. I study guns. On my social media feed, all of a sudden there's like, Jews need to arm themselves. And so for me, that idea first is to understand what the structures are that are dividing us.
How do we get people to critically think so that they can be allies, so to speak? That they understand that being my ally is actually better for them.
I think there are two ways to answer that question. One is to realize the technologies that divide us are so powerful. They're so historical. They're tied to the historical power inequities and financial inequities of this country. Whether or not I agree with the ideology, that power was strong enough to get people who I studied in Tennessee to reject their own health care when they were medically ill. And so there's some technology out there that gets people to buy 30 guns for their room. And so this kind of tribalizing power. And so the flip side of that is there a counter algorithm? Is there a counter technology? Is there a way we can build? And I realize that sounds so idealistic.
It does. But I want to go back to the psychology of it.
Yeah.
Because I think it all points back to psychology. Even with the technology, it's really changing a person's ideology. And how do you do that? We can use technology to get us there because of the images and to reinforce, messages. But if we're not really looking at psychology and the heart of it to address it, how do we move forward?
And I'm wondering, just to piggyback on what you're saying, does allyship really start with the media and the images that we're constantly being bombarded with and the conversations that we continually hear? Meaning, is that where we would start with something like this?
What is the media right now? The media is
Everything.
shifting. The media is everywhere.
It's television, it's social. Let me not go to social media. Oh, God.
If there's one controllable thing, that thing is being dismantled right now. And so media is so many things. It's podcasts that we've never heard of. It's all the different social medias that are going to exploding. It's legacy media, which is honest likes. And so there's not one controllable message right now. No, I do think that this question of allyship, I say this somewhat sadly, but I think we're going to discover a moment of the importance of allyship. I think that allyship is going to boost now because I think that many people are at risk, in danger right now, who didn't think they were. And so I think that this question of like us and them is really shifting right now. And I think that the idea of like a marginalized person, which is not another term I don't use.
I don't like that. I don't feel the least bit, what does it mean, marginalized?
Yeah, first they came for them and then they came for me. Like they're gonna come for a lot of us right now. And so the idea of building alliances right now, I think this idea of all kinds of networks, I think that's what's got
Should we
to
all
come
go
next.
to church together? Well, I'm being kind of funny with it, but at the end of the day, this has to do with your values, right? And what you see as important and how you want to show up as a human being, I forgot who said this, but that Sunday was the most segregated time in America, where white people go to white churches, black people go to black churches. I don't know about temples, but is that a possibility? I don't think so, because when you look at where even religion is going, I'm not sharing a lot of these perspectives that I'm hearing. It doesn't feel like the faith that I grew up in. When we look at nationalism.
Yeah, it's funny because so many of these things are the opposite of allyship. In other words, let's think about it. What makes it hard to form an allyship? It's that the other person is not worthy of my connection or not worthy of my sympathy or something like that. And there's so many forces now. And it's weird because like it's easy for me with thinking about that with people I agree with, but I was doing research with people I completely disagreed with. Like I did 5 years of research with people who we were different politically, we were different about many things, but it's a lot different living in a town for 3 months, I got to know people's kids. I got to know what sports team they rooted for. I would just say it made me think about the ways in which we are being taught to dehumanize each other so much now, to not see that thing. And so I'll just agree with you. It's a scary moment. And I think any institution that can arise for the good right now, I feel myself, and I feel many of us struggling to figure out what is the institution we trust right now, who's going to be that. But I think that, I don't know, hopefully we're resilient, and this is the moment where we're hitting a kind of rock bottom, and then we're going to figure out the power of our connections.
But anyway, it was a pleasure having you on this episode of Brooklyn Savvy. You really enlightened us. Thank you for the work that you are doing. Please continue, and we'd like to see you again on this show.
Anytime. I mean,
Hey,
I feel like
maybe next year. Ooh, hopefully it's going to be good. But maybe next year. We will see you next time on Brooklyn Savvy.